Hello everybody, this is Senex, and welcome to the second analysis that I'm going to be doing of the Furby, that means fewer resources per base maps, that have started to make a real splash in StarCraft 2. This map was sent to me by Ironman, the author and designer of a map that you might have heard of from a little tournament called, the GSL. The map is O'Hara RE, and I just have to say how awesome it is that people who are involved in projects like that, and Iron Man is on the ESV map making team, that people like him are really getting behind this movement and starting to contribute their skills to getting Furby maps out there. We can see that there are two players in this game. This is going to be a Zerg versus Protoss, and this analysis is going to be split into two parts. The first part is going to be looking at the map and all of the cool stuff that Iron Man has brought us in designing it. The map's title, by the way, is Crosspoint, so anybody who wants to go and check it out on the ladder should look for 6M Crosspoint. And the second part of the analysis is going to be looking at the game itself, because it's actually an extremely good game, and there's a lot of cool stuff that we can learn from it, particularly when we compare it to the earlier analysis of the map and what we kind of predicted was going to happen on this map versus what actually we see in the game. So, as we look around the map, we see that the expansions are incredibly well laid out. I have to give a lot of credit to Iron Man. He really knew what he was doing in making the expansions each be slightly more vulnerable than the last one, but never really punishing the player for deciding that they wanted to expand. So for those who are unfamiliar with Furby, it means fewer resources per base, as I said just a moment ago, and that means that there are just 6 mineral fields instead of 8 in your pretty much every base on the map, actually, and instead of 2 gas geysers, there's a single rich Vespene geyser, also called a high-yield gas by a lot of folks. And that reduces the amount of money available at each base by exactly 25%. And what that encourages is for the players to go out and begin expanding a lot more, because if you want to build up to the big nasty armies that you can go and start smashing face with, you're going to actually probably need 4 or 5 bases as a minimum instead of just about 3, which is where we see many StarCraft games pretty much cap out in terms of how many bases the players each have. And so Iron Man has really played to this aspect of the fewer resources per base games by making it so that every time you expand, you become a bit more vulnerable, a bit more open to counterattacks or drops or other things like that, but never really making it hard to expand until you're getting to about your 5th or 6th base, where it does become pretty punishing to try to hold those, and you need to be playing extremely well to maintain your base advantage if that's what you're going for. So, as we look at just the main base that you will be spawning in, we can see this ramp right here has a very, very narrow choke on it. It can be easily walled in with 3 buildings, so you can put like 2 supply depots and a barracks right there, and that will keep your opponent out of your base if there's some very early aggression going on. You see something like a 6 pool, or a pair of proxy raxes, or other nasty things like that. As we move down to the natural, we'll see that there is another ramp which can also be fairly easily controlled, but is a little wider. It's probably about 2 force fields wide if you place them perfectly, or is wide enough to be pretty easily walled in if you're going for something like a Forge Fast expand or a gasless expand as a Terran. You could make like 2 barracks and a couple of supply depots and be fairly safe against most early aggression, but you're taking a little bit more of a risk if you decide that you want to be walling in down here. An extremely early attack or very cleverly placed proxy might ruin your day. As we continue to the 3rd, all of a sudden there are 2 attack paths you need to be worrying about. There is this centerpiece where you could go into the natural or right up into the 3rd, so you're going to definitely need control of this space. But there's also I wouldn't quite call it a backdoor, it's just an alternate way into the 3rd base, which you can see right here on the right. So you now need to be placing your army a little more cleverly, because you could place it probably right about here or so and get okay coverage of both bases, but a very quick attack, for example, a Zergling run by right into the 3rd, or quickly sneaking into the natural or even the main, would be very dangerous, and it's ultimately something you have to watch out for. So you're probably going to want to be splitting your forces so that some of them are here, and some of them are here, maybe even a couple of them in your main base to protect against drops or other nasty chicanery like that. But you're going to want to be able to bring them very quickly together in case your opponent starts a just large push up this middle area. So once again, it's getting into those valuable things that this kind of map encourages, and really what has people so excited about fewer resources per base maps. Suddenly things like splitting up your army, things like taking bases that are a little bit more vulnerable and working harder to protect them are a lot more valuable just because you don't have the money to build these nice maxed out armies on just a couple of bases. So continuing with your expanding, if you wanted to take this 4th base, you'd be you'd be up to 3 attack paths. There we go. You'd be up to 3 primary attack paths that you would need to be defending against. You would have, obviously, this one we're looking at right now. This one would not have been closed off and would still be definitely vulnerable. There's a big attack path right up the middle that leads pretty much straight to your 4th. So you need to watch out for this one in particular because it's very easy for your opponent to seize control of. They don't need to work particularly hard to get at least part of it under their control and just shove right into your 4th base. And then if they feel like being tricky, they could come around from their base and up this nice little ramp that I really, really enjoy that Ironman has put in, just to make you a little more paranoid, need to be a little more cautious about defending this base, or maybe even later on wall it off. That is so cool to me. How often in games do we see players really working hard to wall off a section of the map in order to protect their 4th base? It's not that common. We very often see it with your 1st base and maybe your expansion. I'm sorry, your 1st expansion, your natural, but in order to protect a 4th base? No. They usually just use warp-ins or have a whole bunch of units running around there like a bunch of Zerglings on patrol or something. So I really, really like this feature and think that Ironman did a good job including it. Now, your 5th base is where things start to get nasty. All of a sudden, if you want to try to take this base, which is probably the natural 5th that you'd be looking at, look at how open this area is. This is so dangerous to try to take and hold. You've got to be really on the ball if the game has gotten to this point. But ultimately, if the game has gotten to this point, somebody's going to have to try to take these bases. One of the players is going to need to make an investment in taking and defending a more vulnerable expansion and seeing what they can do with it. And I really like that aspect of fewer resources per base maps, because instead of just taking 3 or 4 fairly easy to defend bases and then maxing out and hitting your opponent until one of you dies, in order to reach those armies, you need to start playing a little bit more risky and taking bases that you might not be able to defend all the way and have to invest a lot of time and effort constantly watching. Am I sure he's not attacking? Am I sure he's not doing a run-by? And it just rewards better play as the game goes on. Obviously, this would be the other 4th that you could take, but it's just as vulnerable. It's getting really close to where your opponent's bases are, so it'd be definitely a place to planetary and maybe try to attack your opponent from. But it's all the things that I said about this base, about this base still apply to this base. It's much more vulnerable, a lot of open space, and it needs to be guarded very carefully, which rewards much better play. There's also a gold expansion in the middle, which I'm not sure how I feel about. I think that it's nice that Ironman threw it in as a just kind of option for people who feel like taking control of it. If you can have control of this section of high ground, you can probably defend it without too much trouble. If you had a whole bunch of siege tanks up here and maybe a couple of bunkers, you could start to seize control of the middle of the map, prevent your opponent from attacking along a couple of the major attack paths, and get the reward out of having a gold base. But for many races, I think it's just going to be too much trouble, and unless the game goes to super late game and like most of the map is mined out, it's not going to be too commonly taken. So, the second thing that I really like about this map is how the attack paths break down. You can see that there are 3 primary ones along the map. Right through the center, right here, there is a huge attack path along the high ground. I predict that this is going to be a major point of tug of war between the players, as every time they want to attack and hit their opponent's either 4th or 3rd on the top or bottom of the map, there's going to be some part of the time that their army is on this high ground, which means it's going to see a lot of engagements, but maybe not as many committed engagements. There won't be a lot of army kills here, but you'll see players kind of posture and be moving around and trying to maybe force their opponents off of this hill and not let them get that nice high ground advantage that will let them push easily directly into these bases. The other attack paths loop around the sides. You can see that there is one that goes up along the left and leads into the natural of your opponent, and there's one that goes down along the right and leads into the natural of the southern player. And both of these can be kind of sneaky, but it depends a lot on Xel'Naga tower control, and that is the third thing that I wanted to bring up that is really, really cool about this map, and that is that the Xel'Naga towers are very, very well placed. Each one of them gives you vision of 2 attack paths. They both give you some vision of the center attack path, but they give you partial vision of, or I'm sorry, well, not partial, but most of the vision of one of the other attack paths. This one will give you vision of the right attack path. This one will give you vision of the left attack path. So if you want to be using them as your main form of scouting, you need to have control of both of them. Otherwise, you need to have maybe a burrowed Zergling, an Overlord floating around, some kind of observer, or maybe even just SCV, a couple Marines hanging out, making sure that if your opponent controls this Xel'Naga watchtower, am I certain that he's not going to be pushing through this space anytime soon while I can't see him? And I really like that aspect of it. It greatly rewards having vision on the map, but doesn't put it unduly out of reach. It's not impossible to see if your opponent's about to attack you, but it's definitely a good thing when you see them start to aggressively push around one of the side corridors. The last thing that I want to bring up, and I think this is the by far best part of this map, is a point that I am borrowing from Day 9, and that is the cut-in attack. Day 9 talks about this in a daily that's number I can't remember, but I highly recommend it to everybody. If I remember, I will look it up and post a link to it in the bottom of this video, and that's that a cut-in attack on the video that he did, he was also doing a map analysis, and he talks about what a cut-in attack is. A cut-in attack is when you put your army in a kind of neutral central position that can attack 2 locations that are important to your enemy easily, but doesn't immediately tell him which one. For example, this low ground space is critical to having defense around. If you lose control of this space, your opponent can attack right into your natural and main, or attack into your third, and you'll have no idea where they're going until their units are literally shooting at your buildings. So if you've done something like, for example, you're a Zerg, you've taken this base, and you have spine crawled the hell out of it, and you're certain, oh man, there's no way that my Protoss opponent is going to be getting in there with his Blink Stalker play, there's just too many things. If he gains control of this space, he'll just go into your natural. It doesn't bother him. He'll kill you somewhere else. He doesn't have to kill you right here. And what the really cool thing about cut-in spaces is that it makes areas that don't actually have buildings or units on them very important to control. If you have control of this area, or another one a little further back is if you have control of this area as an aggressor, you can pop into your enemy's base, do damage, and leave before they can respond. You can pop in when their army's just a little out of position. If your army is hanging out down here, and your opponent gains control of this area, they can pop in, kill this base, and leave, and there's very little you can do to stop them. So all of a sudden, this space that looks like just a gigantic empty piece of ground with really no strategic value whatsoever is critically important because of what it allows you to get access to. That's the important piece of it. It's not what's actually on the terrain, it's what the terrain will let you do in a minute. So I think that that's a great part of this map, and I'm really, really looking forward to showing you guys how that ends up playing out on this map. So the second part of this analysis is going to be looking at the game itself, and I'm going to get that started right now.